By mid-1942, the world map was stained with the rapid, violent expansion of the Axis powers. The sheer scale seemed impossible to reverse. Looking at this photograph, you get a sense of that overwhelming scale. Thousands of German tanks were tearing across the Soviet Union. In the Pacific, Japanese Zero fighters ruled the skies, while Erwin Rommel's panzer divisions were aggressively pushing through North Africa. But empires forged purely on speed share a common vulnerability. The dizzying pace of their early victories infected Axis leadership with a blinding arrogance. They looked at their adversaries and saw only weakness. They assumed the Soviet army was permanently paralyzed. The American public lacked the stomach for a protracted fight, and the British were on the verge of total collapse. That overconfidence led to 3 catastrophic gambles. The Axis leaders made fatal decisions that would shatter their supposedly invincible empires. We start with Italy's Benito Mussolini.
Staring down from this portrait, you can practically see the ego driving his ambition for a new Roman Empire. This map shows exactly how far his ambition outpaced reality. He pushed his forces deep into North Africa and across the Adriatic into Greece, but his troops were woefully under-equipped for the rugged terrain and the fierce local resistance. The Italian offensives quickly reversed into embarrassing retreats. This forced an already stretched Adolf Hitler into a defensive panic, compelling him to divert precious resources and send Field Marshal Erwin Rommel to bail out his ally. Instead of a quick rescue, Germany found itself shackled to a massive logistical nightmare. The vast, unforgiving expanses of the desert bled German fuel, armor, and manpower dry for years. The drain culminated at the Battle of El Alamein. Here, a heavily reinforced Allied army under the command of General Bernard Montgomery slammed into the exhausted, undersupplied Axis forces, shattering their desert campaign. Mussolini's vanity project achieved the exact opposite of its goal. Instead of securing a new empire, he single-handedly opened Europe's vulnerable southern flank to an inevitable Allied invasion. Halfway across the world, Imperial Japan was plotting its own massive overreach. Eager to secure their unchecked expansion, they planned a final, decisive strike against the United States naval fleet at Midway Island. But the Americans were already reading their mail. U.S. codebreakers had intercepted the highly complex Japanese operational plan, allowing American aircraft carriers to slip into position and wait in ambush. The situation peaked when Japanese Admiral Chuichi Nagumo faced a critical choice. Believing the American ships were absent, he ordered his reserve aircraft to be stripped of their ship-killing torpedoes and rearmed with high-explosive land bombs. Midway through this laborious process, reconnaissance planes spotted the American carriers. Nagumo abruptly reversed his order, leaving his flight decks utterly chaotic, packed end-to-end with exposed aviation fuel, loose bombs, and frantic crewmen. This photo captures the exact moment the trap sprang shut. American dive bombers plummeted out of the clouds, catching the Japanese carriers completely by surprise, while their decks were highly volatile powder kegs. In a span of just 5 minutes, 3 of Japan's most powerful aircraft carriers were reduced to flaming wrecks. Nagumo's lethal hesitation permanently incinerated Japan's mastery of the Pacific. The most devastating gamble of the war, however, belonged to Adolf Hitler. Operation Barbarossa, his invasion of the Soviet Union, was executing with terrifying precision until his ego overrode the advice of his own generals. As you can see on this map, the German panzers were within a couple hundred miles of Moscow, but Hitler inexplicably halted the advance, ordering his tanks to hook sharply south toward Kiev instead. That fateful delay bought the Soviet army crucial time to recover and birthed a new, lethal obsession, capturing an industrial center on the Volga River simply because it bore his arch-enemy's name, Stalingrad. Look at the sheer devastation of these skeletal buildings. The German Sixth Army was pulled into a savage house-to-house meat grinder, completely neutralizing the speed and mobility that made their panzers so effective. When the Soviet army inevitably counterattacked and encircled the city, Hitler refused to authorize a breakout. He demanded his freezing, starving soldiers stand their ground and fight to the death. Staking everything on a name on a map cost Germany over 300,000 men. It was the absolute catastrophe of their Eastern campaign, a self-inflicted wound born purely of vanity.
By the time 1943 rolled around, the era of the Axis lightning wars was dead. The shock value had worn off, and Germany, Italy, and Japan were now bleeding heavily across every major front. At Kursk, the German army ran headfirst into the new industrial reality of the Soviet Union. Swarms of these T-34 tanks absorbed the best armor Germany had to offer, overwhelming them with sheer mechanical output. In the Pacific jungles of Guadalcanal, Japanese fanaticism fractured against the unrelenting weight of American military production. These exhausted Marines systematically pushed Imperial forces off their fortified islands. And in Italy, the Allies subjected the German defenders to a brutal, grinding crawl up the peninsula, blasting through ancient strongholds like the Monte Cassino monastery here, long after the Italian people had overthrown and executed Mussolini. The Axis collapse was a feat of self-destruction. Their leadership systematically ignored the realities of geography and logistics, effectively sabotaging their own empires through sheer arrogance. The dictators had promised their people thousand-year empires and divine conquests. Instead, their hubris left those grand visions buried forever in the mud, the snow, and the bottom of the sea.